Picture this: a 7-year-old girl stands completely alone at a freshly dug grave, clutching a wilted dandelion in her tiny fist. The cemetery stretches endlessly around her, filled with strangers in black suits who've already begun to walk away. Her father, her only parent, her entire world, lies 6 feet beneath the cold earth. But what happened next would change not just her life, but the lives of thousands of others. The words whispered by a stranger that day would echo through decades, proving that sometimes the most profound moments happen when we think no one is watching. Emma Rodriguez was just 7 years old when her world collapsed. Her father, Miguel, had been everything to her: mother, father, best friend, and protector all rolled into one. Miguel worked 3 jobs to keep their tiny apartment in East Los Angeles, often coming home with paint-stained clothes and exhausted eyes, but always with a smile for his little girl. Emma's mother had left when she was barely 2, unable to handle the responsibility of parenthood, leaving Miguel to raise his daughter alone. The heart attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning in March 2018. Miguel collapsed at the construction site where he worked his day job, his massive heart simply giving out from years of stress, overwork, and the weight of carrying the world on his shoulders. He was only 34 years old. The paramedics tried everything, but Miguel Rodriguez was pronounced dead at 11:47 a.m., leaving behind a 7-year-old daughter who didn't even know her father was gone. Emma waited at school that day, sitting on the steps long after the final bell had rung, watching for her father's beaten-up Honda Civic to turn the corner. He was never late. When Mrs. Patterson, her teacher, finally approached with tears in her eyes and a social worker by her side, Emma knew something terrible had happened. The words seemed to float in the air like smoke: "Your daddy had an accident, sweetheart. He's gone to heaven." The funeral was a small affair. Miguel had been a private man with few close friends, and most of his co-workers were too busy surviving their own struggles to attend. The extended family from Mexico couldn't afford the trip, leaving Emma virtually alone with a handful of neighbors and the social worker assigned to her case. As the priest spoke in both English and Spanish, Emma clutched the dandelion she'd picked from the crack in the sidewalk outside their apartment building, the last flower her father had pointed out to her, calling it nature's little miracle growing where it shouldn't. As the small crowd began to disperse, Emma found herself standing alone beside the mound of fresh earth. The social worker was handling paperwork with the funeral director, the neighbors were quietly slipping away, and suddenly, the cemetery felt impossibly vast and empty. Emma had never felt so small, so utterly abandoned in her entire short life. That's when she felt it, a gentle hand on her shoulder. Emma looked up to see a man in an expensive black coat, someone she'd never seen before. He was tall and distinguished, with kind gray eyes and silver hair. Something about his presence felt different from the others, not hurried, not uncomfortable, not eager to leave. He knelt down to her level, bringing his face close to hers, and Emma could see her own reflection in his eyes. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked softly. "Emma," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man nodded thoughtfully, then glanced at the headstone that read, "Miguel Rodriguez, beloved father." When he looked back at Emma, his eyes held a depth of understanding that seemed impossible for a stranger to possess. "Emma," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your father loved you more than all the stars in the sky, and that love doesn't disappear just because he's gone. But more importantly, you have something inside you, something powerful and special that the world needs. One day, you're going to help people the way someone should have helped your father. Promise me you'll remember this moment." Emma nodded, though she didn't understand what he meant. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope with her name written on it in elegant handwriting. "Don't open this until you're 18, he said. "When that day comes, you'll know what to do." Before Emma could ask any questions, the social worker approached. "Emma, honey, we need to go now," she called out. When Emma turned back to thank the stranger, he was already walking away, disappearing between the rows of headstones like a guardian angel returning to wherever guardian angels go. The years that followed were a blur of temporary homes, new schools, and the constant ache of loss. Emma bounced between foster families, some kind, some indifferent, some actively harmful. She learned to keep her few possessions in a pillowcase so she could pack quickly when the inevitable call came to move to another placement. The envelope from the cemetery stranger traveled with her everywhere, hidden in the bottom of her makeshift suitcase, the one constant in a life of perpetual change. Foster family number 1 lasted 6 months. The Johnsons were well-meaning but overwhelmed with their own 3 children. Emma tried to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible, but even her quiet presence seemed to add stress to an already strained household. When their youngest son was diagnosed with special needs requiring full-time attention, Emma was quietly moved along. Foster family number 2 was worse. The Hendersons treated foster children like a business transaction, collecting monthly checks while providing minimal care. Emma slept on a cot in the basement and was expected to help with housework and childcare for the family's biological children. She lasted 8 months before a surprise social worker visit revealed the neglectful conditions and she was removed. Through it all, Emma excelled in school. Education became her escape, her hope, her way of honoring her father's memory. Miguel had always told her that knowledge was the one thing no one could take away from her, and she clung to those words during the darkest nights. Teachers noticed her hunger for learning, her perfect attendance despite chaotic living situations, her mature perspective that spoke to experiences no child should have to endure. By age 16, Emma had lived in 7 different foster homes. She'd learned to read people quickly, to anticipate when a placement was about to end, to protect her heart from getting too attached. The envelope remained unopened, but sometimes, on the worst nights, she would hold it and remember the kind stranger's words about having something special inside her that the world needed. Emma's 18th birthday fell on a gray November morning in 2029. She was living with the Patels, her 7th and final foster family, who had become as close to a real family as she'd experienced since her father's death. Mrs. Patel had made her favorite cake, chocolate with strawberries, and for the first time in years, Emma felt something approaching happiness. That evening, alone in her room, Emma finally opened the envelope she'd carried for 11 years. Inside was a handwritten letter and a cashier's check that made her hands shake when she saw the amount, $100,000. The letter read, "Dear Emma, if you're reading this, you've survived more than any child should have to endure. Your father was a good man who deserved better from this world, and you deserve better than what life has given you so far. This money is not charity, it's an investment in the future you're going to create. Use it for college, for your dreams, for the life your father wanted you to have. But remember what I told you at the cemetery, you have something special inside you that the world needs. When you discover what that is, I hope you'll use it to help other children who are standing where you once stood. The world failed your father, and it failed you. Don't let it fail the next Emma. A friend who believes in you." At the bottom of the letter was a phone number and a name, Robert Chen, Chen Foundation. Emma's hands trembled as she researched the name online. Robert Chen was a tech billionaire worth over $2 billion, known for his philanthropy and his own story of growing up in poverty before building his fortune. But there was something else, a personal tragedy that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. 15 years earlier, Robert Chen had lost his own 7-year-old daughter in a car accident. The grief had nearly destroyed him, leading to a divorce, a battle with depression, and a complete reevaluation of his life's purpose. He'd been at the cemetery that day visiting his daughter's grave when he saw Emma standing alone, and something about her solitary figure had moved him to action. Emma used the money exactly as intended. She enrolled at UCLA, studying social work and child psychology with a minor in nonprofit management. For the first time since her father's death, she had stability, purpose, and hope for the future. She threw herself into her studies with the same intensity she'd once used for survival, graduating summa cum laude in just 3 years. During her junior year, Emma began volunteering at a local foster care facility. The moment she walked into those halls, breathing in the familiar scent of institutional disinfectant and hearing the cautious voices of children trying not to hope too hard, she knew she'd found her calling. These children looked at her with the same guarded expressions she'd once worn, and she saw herself in every single face. Emma understood things that the well-meaning social workers didn't. She knew that foster children hoarded food not out of greed but out of fear of never knowing when the next meal would come. She understood why they kept their belongings in bags rather than unpacking into dressers, because dressers meant permanence, and permanence was a luxury they couldn't afford to believe in. She recognized the way they sized up new adults, looking for signs of kindness or cruelty, calculating how long this placement might last. Her senior thesis project became a comprehensive study on the long-term effects of foster care system instability. The statistics were heartbreaking: 20% of foster children become homeless after aging out of the system. Only 3% earn college degrees. The suicide rate among former foster children is nearly twice the national average. But Emma's research also revealed something crucial: the children who succeeded against these odds almost always had one thing in common: a single adult who believed in them unconditionally. On graduation day, as Emma walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Robert Chen sat in the back row, applauding with tears in his eyes. After the ceremony, he approached her with a proposal that would change everything. "I've been following your academic career," Robert told Emma over coffee that afternoon. "Your professors speak very highly of you, and your research on foster care outcomes is exactly the kind of evidence-based approach we need. I have a proposition for you." Robert explained that he'd been looking for the right person to run a new initiative within the Chen Foundation, a program specifically designed to support foster children aging out of the system. The program would provide not just financial assistance, but mentorship, life skills training, educational support, and most importantly, a consistent adult presence in these young people's lives. "I can fund it," Robert said, "but I need someone who understands it from the inside. Someone who's lived it. Someone who won't see these kids as statistics but as individuals with unlimited potential." Emma accepted without hesitation. The Second Chance Foundation launched 6 months later with Emma as its executive director. The program was revolutionary in its approach. Instead of simply providing temporary assistance, it created long-term relationships. Each participant was paired with a mentor who committed to a 5-year partnership. The program provided college scholarships, job training, mental health support, and practical life skills like financial literacy and apartment hunting, but the most important element was something Emma called chosen family, creating permanent connections for young people who'd never experienced them. Mentors weren't just advisors, they were the consistent adults these young people had never had, the ones who showed up for graduations, celebrated birthdays, and provided a safety net when life got complicated. 5 years after its launch, the Second Chance Foundation had supported over 500 young people aging out of foster care. The success stories began piling up like answered prayers. Marcus, who'd aged out of the system with nowhere to go, earned his nursing degree and now works in pediatric care. Sarah, who'd been kicked out of 3 foster homes for behavioral problems, discovered she had autism and, with proper support, became a computer programmer. David, who'd spent his 18th birthday alone in a shelter, now owns a small restaurant and employs other former foster youth. But the story that meant the most to Emma was 16-year-old Sophia, who reminded Emma so much of herself it was almost painful. Sophia had entered the foster system at age 8 after her mother's death, bouncing between homes just as Emma had. When they first met, Sophia was angry, defensive, and convinced that every adult would eventually abandon her. Emma saw through the tough exterior to the scared little girl underneath. She began meeting with Sophia weekly, not as a caseworker but as someone who understood. They went to movies, shared meals, and slowly, Sophia began to trust. When Sophia turned 18, Emma was there, not just as a program director, but as the consistent adult presence Sophia had never had. "You're like the sister I always wanted," Sophia told Emma on her graduation day from high school, tears streaming down her face. "You showed me that someone who understands can make all the difference." Emma realized that the stranger's words from that day at the cemetery had finally come true. She was helping people the way someone should have helped her father. She was ensuring that other children didn't have to stand alone at their parents' graves, wondering if anyone in the world cared about their future. 10 years after opening the letter that changed her life, Emma returned to the cemetery where her father was buried. She came every year on the anniversary of his death, but this visit was different. This time, she wasn't alone. Standing beside her were 12 young adults, all former foster youth who had graduated from the Second Chance Foundation program. They'd insisted on coming with her, understanding the significance of this place in Emma's story and wanting to honor the man whose death had inadvertently led to their second chances at life. As Emma knelt to place fresh flowers on her father's grave, she whispered words she'd been saving for this moment. "Dad, I kept the promise. I found what was special inside me, and I used it to help other kids who were standing where I once stood. I think you would be proud." Behind her, she heard a familiar voice. He would be more than proud. He would be amazed. Emma turned to see Robert Chin approaching, now in his 70s but still carrying himself with the same dignity she remembered from that day when she was 7. His eyes held the same kindness, but now also something else, deep satisfaction at seeing his investment in her come to fruition in ways he could never have imagined. "You've helped more people than you realize," he told her. "Those 500 young people you've supported, they'll go on to help others. Their children will grow up with stability you helped provide. The teachers, nurses, entrepreneurs, and leaders among them will touch thousands more lives. That's the real power of what you've built." Emma looked around at the young adults surrounding her, Marcus in his nursing scrubs, having just finished a shift at the children's hospital, Sarah clutching her computer science degree, David talking animatedly about his plans to expand his restaurant, and she finally understood the full magnitude of what had started with a stranger's kindness on the worst day of her life. Word of the Second Chance Foundation's success spread throughout the social services community. Other cities began requesting similar programs, and Emma found herself traveling across the country, training social workers and setting up satellite offices. The model was replicated in 15 states, each program adapted to local needs but maintaining the core principle: every young person deserves at least one adult who believes in them unconditionally. The foundation's approach caught the attention of researchers at Harvard and Stanford, who began studying the long-term outcomes of participants. The data was remarkable: 85% of Second Chance Foundation participants enrolled in post-secondary education, compared to the national average of 20% for former foster youth. The employment rate among graduates was 94%, and most significantly, the program had a 0% homelessness rate among its participants. Emma was invited to testify before Congress about foster care reform. Standing at that podium, looking out at senators and representatives, she thought about 7-year-old Emma standing alone at her father's grave. That little girl could never have imagined that her pain would one day inform national policy, that her experience would become the foundation for helping thousands of other children. "The foster care system doesn't need to be reformed," she told the lawmakers. "It needs to be revolutionized. We need to stop treating these children as temporary inconveniences and start seeing them as the future leaders, innovators, and healers they have the potential to become." Her testimony led to the passage of the Chosen Family Act, which provided federal funding for mentor-based programs for aging out foster youth. The legislation allocated $500 million over 5 years, enough to create Second Chance Foundation programs in all 50 states. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon in 2041, Emma was reviewing scholarship applications in her office when her assistant knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "She says it's about her father." Emma looked up to see a young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair and nervous eyes. Something about her seemed familiar, though Emma was certain they'd never met. "Ms. Rodriguez?" the woman asked hesitantly. "My name is Maria Chen. I think you knew my father." Emma's breath caught. Chen. Robert Chen had never mentioned having another daughter. Maria sat down and pulled out a worn photograph of a little girl with pigtails, standing next to a tall man with kind eyes. "This is me and my dad when I was 7, she said. "It was taken the day before the accident." Emma's world tilted. This was Robert's daughter, the one who had died in the car accident, the tragedy that had led him to the cemetery that day when he found Emma standing alone at her father's grave. But Maria was very much alive. "I didn't die in that accident," Maria explained, seeing Emma's confusion. "I was in a coma for 6 months. When I woke up, my father had already had his breakdown, my mother had divorced him thinking I wouldn't survive, and I'd been placed with my grandmother while everyone fought over custody and medical decisions." Maria's voice grew softer. "By the time I was fully recovered, my father was so consumed with guilt and grief that he couldn't face seeing me. He thought I'd be better off without the father who'd caused the accident that nearly killed me. My grandmother raised me, and I was told my father had moved away and didn't want contact. Emma listened in stunned silence as Maria continued. It wasn't until last year, when my grandmother was dying, that she told me the truth. My father had been sending money for my care all these years, watching from a distance, making sure I had everything I needed for college and medical care. She gave me his address, but when I went to see him, Maria's voice broke. He died of a heart attack 2 weeks before I got there. Just like your father, he was only in his early 60s. The parallels were devastating and beautiful at the same time. 2 fathers, gone too soon. 2 daughters, left to navigate the world without them. But this time, Emma wasn't 7 years old and alone. Emma reached across her desk and took Maria's hands. Your father saved my life, she said simply. And through me, he saved hundreds of other lives. He never forgot you, he just carried his love in a different way. Over the following months, Emma and Maria developed the relationship that Robert had never been able to have with his daughter. Maria, it turned out, was a pediatric surgeon who specialized in treating children from low-income families. She'd been doing her father's work without even knowing it, just as Emma had been carrying forward his legacy of believing in children who had no one else to believe in them. Together, they established the Robert Chin Memorial Program, specifically designed to help children who'd experienced medical trauma and family separation. The program provided not just medical support, but family reunification services, trauma counseling, and long-term follow-up care. On the first anniversary of Robert's death, Emma and Maria stood together at his grave, just as Emma and her Second Chance Foundation family had stood at her father's grave years before. But this time, they weren't alone. Surrounding them were dozens of young people whose lives had been touched by Robert's legacy, former foster youth who'd found their chosen families, medical patients who'd received life-saving care, and scholarship recipients who were now changing the world in their own ways. Maria read aloud from a letter her father had written but never sent. My greatest regret is that I let my guilt keep me from the daughter I loved more than life itself. But perhaps that love found another way to matter. Perhaps it was meant to help other children find the futures they deserve. Emma thought about the chain of events that had brought them all to this moment: her father's death, Robert's appearance at the cemetery, the envelope that changed everything, the foundation that grew from her pain into something beautiful and lasting. She thought about the hundreds of young people who were now building lives they'd never thought possible, who were raising children in stable homes, who were becoming the adults she and her father never had. As they walked away from the cemetery that day, Emma realized something profound: pain doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a different chapter, one where love multiplies instead of disappears, where loss transforms into purpose, where a 7-year-old girl standing alone at her father's grave grows up to ensure that no other child has to stand alone ever again. The stranger who touched her shoulder that day had whispered words about having something special inside her that the world needed. Now, decades later, Emma finally understood what he'd seen: not just her potential, but her capacity to transform pain into purpose, loss into love, and individual healing into collective hope. Today, the Second Chance Foundation operates in all 50 states and has expanded internationally. Over 10,000 young people have found their chosen families through the program. The success rate remains unprecedented, but more importantly, the love rate is 100%. Every participant knows that someone believes in them, someone is rooting for their success, someone will be there when they graduate, when they get married, when they have children of their own, and somewhere, in a dimension beyond our understanding, 2 fathers, Miguel Rodriguez and Robert Chen, are watching their daughters change the world, one child at a time, proving that love never dies, it just finds new ways to grow. The most beautiful part of this story isn't the success statistics or the national recognition or even the congressional testimony. It's the fact that every single day, somewhere in America, a young person aging out of foster care gets a phone call that starts with the words, "I believe in you," and ends with the promise, "You're not alone anymore." That's the whisper that echoes through generations, the quiet revolution that started when a millionaire touched a little girl's shoulder and reminded her that she had something special inside her that the world needed. He was right. The world needed her capacity for love, her understanding of loss, her ability to transform personal pain into collective healing, and the most incredible part. This story is still being written. Every day, more chapters are added by the young people who refuse to let their difficult beginnings determine their endings, who choose to break cycles instead of perpetuating them, who understand that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to let others stand alone. That if this story moved you, if you believe that every child deserves at least one adult who believes in them unconditionally, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video if you believe in the power of chosen family, comment below with your own story of someone who believed in you when you needed it most, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, because here's the truth, we all have something special inside us that the world needs. Sometimes we just need someone to whisper it in our ear and remind us that we're not standing alone.